Hey guys, I'm your host, Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Have you picked up the latest volume of Kowabana, Volume 10, yet? If you haven't checked it out, do head over to Amazon to pick up your copy right now. We've got creepy curses, human horrors, vengeful ghosts, and much more on display, so don't miss out. We also have a brand new design up in the Kowabana merchandise store. You can check that out at kowabana.store. We have shirts, mugs, stickers, masks, and much more, so do check it out and help support the show at the same time. This week, we're looking at a few stories from one of my favourite topics, old customs and rituals. I lived in the countryside, so I was able to take part in quite a few festivals, and I was able to learn about all sorts of customs as well, seeing as I was out Izumo way, the home of the gods. And, to kick this week's episode off, we're heading way out into the countryside to uncover the legend of something called the Kappa Well. It's said that water appears in it only on the night of the new moon, and if you drink it, it will extend your life. But is it really true? Find out in Kappa Well. On this particular day, my close friend S drove us to an abandoned village deep in the mountains on the border of the prefecture. There were 3 of us, as usual. S drove while I sat in the passenger's seat. Our other friend K sat in the back. We left the city around 10 a.m, stopped briefly for lunch, and then the clock passed 2. We were about 1 hour away from our goal, the abandoned village. The car drove leisurely along the slope running alongside a river. I looked down again at the map I had open. The abandoned village we were heading to was no longer on the map, so we had marked it with a red pen instead. The contour lines were rather narrow. That was how far out of the way it was. Suddenly, I heard some light snoring coming from the back seat. You know, every single time he does this, it makes me wonder how someone can sleep so comfortably while using someone else as a footrest, S said, his tone more exasperated than annoyed as he glanced in the rearview mirror. K was the one who had planned today's little abandoned village tour. Apparently there's a strange well in this village, he told us the day before at our university cafeteria, a gleam in his eyes like a little boy. He truly loved stuff like this. It was thanks to him that we'd visited numerous ghost spots and such. Of course, most of them were disappointing, but once in a while, we found something truly good. K gets carsick easily. It's better than him throwing up in the car, isn't it? Hey, is he drooling? According to K, the well in the abandoned village was usually dry, but on the night of the new moon, it would apparently be full of water. And at the bottom of that well lay the remains of a dead kappa, and if you drank that water, then you could extend your lifespan by 50 years. A well with a kappa in it, I muttered, and S yawned. That reminds me, aren't you supposed to become immortal if you eat a kappa's flesh or something? Huh? Oh, you might be confusing that with a mermaid's flesh, but yeah, there is a legend that goes something like that. There are all sorts of stories about kappas. They're pretty popular these days, so there are countless variations. Ignoring the final part of S's story, I stared out the window and wondered whether the water in that well really was full of kappa broth. Would we find something this time, or would it be another miss? Either way, we'd come all this way, so, at the very least, I wanted to return home with a good story. Oh, and for the record, we were unable to see the moon that night. Hey S, if there really is water in the well, are you gonna drink it? No way. Even if you ignore the story about it extending your life, the water in there would be dirty and uncontrolled. There's no telling what might be in it. Yeah, for sure. Neither S nor I had any intention of drinking it. Only one of us, the guy sleeping in the back, K, seemed ready to do so. The guy even brought his favorite coffee cup with a stick of sugar and some instant coffee, if you could believe it. Oh, come on! He's drooling on the seat! Hey, K! S looked into the rearview mirror and screamed. But still, K continued sleeping comfortably and drooling on the seat. He was no doubt dreaming something that would delight an occultist like himself. S stopped the car and woke him up. An hour and a half later, the road grew narrower and rougher, and I started to grow a little worried. I was beginning to doubt whether the map we had was right when finally we passed a row of Jizo statues and a small temple. We had reached our destination. "Hey, we're here! We're here!" Kay screamed and jumped out of the car. Although the village was abandoned, it still looked like a regular village. There were numerous abandoned houses lining the slope of the mountain, but they were wooden, so most were rotting and falling apart. The grass was knee-high, so it was hard to tell where the road was unless you looked really closely. A small river flowed beyond the village, and beyond that was a mountain. It would perhaps be more apt to call it an overgrown green wall. "Hey, you guys! Over here! Over here!" It was Kay again. I was standing by the car looking around, but his voice suddenly brought me back. S, who was the last out of the car, then followed me. Kay stood by the edge of the village, where it was mostly nothing but forest. "It's the Kappa Well," he said and pointed. The well he spoke of was stone and square-shaped, roughly 70 centimeters wide. There was a stone lid on top of it. There was no roof or bucket. When I heard the word well, I was expecting something a little more grand, so it was more than a little disappointing. But then, this was probably what most wells were like in old villages. "Hey, give me a hand! Let's get this lid off!" S and I didn't want to, but the three of us were able to remove the lid. It was ridiculously heavy. The moment we got it off, a cold breeze caressed our cheeks, much like when you open a refrigerator. A deep, dark hole sat before us. A vertical hole in the ground. As I looked into it, it was like a caterpillar crawled over the back of my neck. "Wah!" Kay screamed into the hole. His voice bounced off the walls and came back at us several times over. Then he dropped a stone into it. There was a dull thud, meaning there was no water in the well. "Looks like it's dry," S said. The three of us looked at each other in silence. Kay then took a torch out of his bag and shone it down the well. We still couldn't see the bottom. Was the light not strong enough? But it looked like the well was rather deep. Of course, we couldn't see the body of a kappa or anything down there either. "I can't see a thing." "It looks like it's maybe 30 meters deep. I thought it would be shallow, but I guess not." Then S picked up a stone off the ground as though to throw it into the well again. But then he suddenly looked at the stone in his hand, as though he'd just realized something and, without throwing it, turned to Kay. "And? What now?" "Yeah," Kay answered, his voice full of vigor. "It's obvious, isn't it? According to the rumors, the well will be full of water on the night of the new moon. So, we have to wait until the moon rises." Meaning, we had to sit around and wait. I knew he was going to say that. I let out a groan and looked around. An abandoned village. Waiting here until dark could potentially be a fun and horrifying experience. If I were alone, then I definitely wouldn't do it. For the time being, we decided to go back to the car. I checked the time and it was only 4:30. Kay brought a deck of cards, so we chose a spot with as little grass as possible, put down the front windscreen shade, then sat down to play. Kay was easily the winner. Then we played Blind Man's Bluff. S won that one. In the end, I didn't win a single game of anything. "So, about that well," S said casually, almost like he was talking to himself. We stopped playing poker and had started playing Tycoon instead. "Where on earth did all this about a Kappa come from anyway?" Kay threw away some of his cards when it was his turn, and then answered. "Huh? Are you talking to me?" "Well, you're the only one who'd know," S said. "Ah, yeah, that's true. Well, apparently, long ago, there was a husband and wife that lived here, and they found a Kappa in the river. The husband hid it with a stick from behind, tied it up, and then brought it back to the village." "The Kappa? Why?" I asked. Kay gave a small laugh. "To eat, of course." "Seriously?" "Kappa flesh was thought to grant immortality. But, I don't know, maybe they really were just hungry. Either way, just when they were about to eat it, the Kappa woke up and ran away. They chased after it. It kept running, and it ran all the way to that well." "Well, that sucks." "Then the villagers put a lid over the well. Apparently, the Kappa screamed inside the well for 3 days and 3 nights. Then, on the 4th night, it was the night of the new moon. The screams stopped. The Kappa had died." The well wasn't connected to an underground waterway. No matter how good a swimmer it was, there was no way for it to escape. Apparently, it was after that the well dried up. There was no more water. But strangely, it would fill up only on nights of the new moon. It was Kappa water. This info apparently came from an old guy in the next village. It's just hearsay, but... "Oh hey, I'm winning!" "Not anymore." "Ah!" And so we passed the time chatting, playing cards, and batting away insects. Next thing we knew, it was getting dark. Night then quickly fell. It wasn't long until it was so dark that we couldn't even see the cards in front of us. The mountains at night are dark. We couldn't see a thing. Birds and bugs cried around us. Leaves rustled loudly. And there was no moon in the sky. A light came on. Kay took a gas camping lantern out of his bag and turned it on. "Let's go." S and I grabbed our own torches and made our way over towards the well. The 3 of us were silent. Somehow, the atmosphere was different without the sun. It was dark. Just really dark. Could things really change so much just without light? I was actually starting to feel afraid. I shone the torch. There was the well. The lid was off. I looked around the area. It was like the darkness inside the well had blown out and enveloped the area. "Well, well, it's time to finally discover whether there's any water inside the well," Kay shouted, perhaps trying to liven things up. I smiled. It did put me somewhat at ease. "It's time! In my hand I have a single stone, and now I'm going to toss it into the well to check. Here we go." As he said, "Go," he dropped the stone into the well. Splash. "Eh?" we all said instinctively. There was a noise. It splashed. It was a reply from the bottom of the well. The well was now full of water. But during the day, there had been nothing. Now, there was water. Whoa, for real? That's amazing! I froze. Even Kay, the one who threw the stone, was surprised. S, who was supposed to be the calmest of us all, looked at the well and started muttering something. He was scared. This has nothing to do with the tide. The new moon isn't strong enough to make water push through the ground, and there's not even an ocean around here anyway. Has the Earth started spinning faster? Ha! How stupid. But supposing it did... I looked at S. He looked up. The water was there from the start, he muttered, picking up 2 stones with one hand from the ground and then holding them over the well. Before I could ask what he was going to do, he dropped a stone into the well. Splash. The sound of something falling into water. S moved his hand and then dropped the second stone. This time, there was a different sound. Why? What did it mean? S did something. There's gotta be a pile of rocks or something poking out of the water, S said to me, looking surprised. When K threw the rock earlier today, it just happened to land on those instead. It was too deep to see anything. Because we had already heard beforehand that it was dry, we only checked once. I had no idea what was going on anymore. The only thing I could think of was that S was oddly calm considering the situation. Huh. Can't say I would have ever thought of that. I honestly meant what I said, and K no doubt felt the same way, but the look on S's face wasn't a happy one. I didn't want to get it right. Huh? Eh? Get what right? Hey, K? S called for K, ignoring my question. You've got a bunch of stuff in your bag, right? Have you got a rope and bucket? Ah, yeah, I do. I heard there wouldn't be a bucket here, so... Eh? You want me to get them? Yeah. K took a small plastic bucket and a thin rope out of his bag. S took them, silently wrapped the rope around the handle of the bucket, and then gripped the other end himself. Then he lowered the bucket into the well. There was the sound of water splashing as it hit. Hey, what the hell, S? Didn't you just say before that you didn't want to be right? K asked instead of me. But S said nothing and just shook the rope in his hand. He was scooping water. Then he suddenly yanked the rope. There was a loud sound within the well, like a castle made of logs falling over. Whatever was piled up in there fell to the bottom of the well. S slowly pulled the rope up. K, that story of the Kappa you just told us, was that true? Eh? Eh? A strange sound escaped my throat. I wasn't prepared for his sudden question. S ignored me and continued. It was a story about a well drying up because of a kappa. They blamed the kappa for it. That I can understand. I still didn't understand what he was getting at. But the well still works. There's water in it, and we can scoop it. Even if we can't drink it, it can still be used for farming, cleaning, and washing things. All sorts of things. The people of this village, they made up that story of the kappa on purpose and said that this well was dry, even though we can still use it. S handled the rope. I followed the movement with my eyes. There's water here, but we can't use it. He lifted the bucket to the edge of the well. Then he grabbed it. The yellow bucket was full of clear water, and one more thing. It was long and thin. What was it? A stone? I never thought I'd fish up something like this. S gave a bitter grin. Do you guys know what this is? I had no idea. Both Kay and I shook our heads. S took the thing out of the bucket. So it was a stone? It looked human in shape, but without a head or face. Just like a bowling pin. S then reached into his pocket and took something out. It was another stone, a round one. He then placed it on top of the long, thin stone. He shone his light on it, and the round stone looked just like a face. Have you ever heard how the word kappa used to be used in the past to refer to a child that had to be culled due to poverty? What on earth was he saying? They also referred to these children as mizuko, or children of the water. I felt as if a lukewarm breeze washed over me. I turned to look inside the well. Was something trying to crawl out of it at that very moment? That was certainly how it felt. Maybe you guys don't get it, but there's a child clinging to this. S pointed to the leg section of the jizo. It was true. There was a small bulge there. That was a child? This is a statue for Mizuko. A statue to commemorate them. It was inside the well. Do you understand? Something was crawling up the well. What was it? What was it? The Mizuko. The children who were culled. Children? Why did I think it was more than one? This isn't a well. It's a grave. And I don't think it was just for one child. It's a communal grave. Just like the Kappa story, it was done for food. Not directly, but, you know, so the adults could eat instead. Then S grabbed the bucket and presented it to Kay. You want to drink it? It could certainly extend your life, in a certain way. After all, it's Mizuko. It's full of broth from children who should have lived decades longer. Kay gave a weak smile and faintly shook his head. There's no way I can drink that. Yeah, that's true. And how about you? You want to drink it? S said, and then presented the bucket to me. No way, no way, no way, no way, no way, absolutely no way. Right? Then S snickered and lowered the bucket back into the well. With that, the game was over. We put the lid back on over the top of the Jizo statues, and the three of us put our hands together in prayer. As we left the village, I realized something for the first time. All those Jizo statues lined up by the small temple near the entrance to the village. They're all for the Mizuko as well, S said as we passed them. I broke out in goosebumps. Oh, how terrifying. What a terrifying place. The scariest thing of all wasn't ghosts, or yokai, or the darkness, or anything like that. People. It was people. The ride back was silent. The only sound was that of S's yawns. Even Kay didn't say a word. I'm sorry. I was kidding, S muttered after another yawn. I heard him, but I said nothing in reply. I was kidding, he said again a short while later, stronger this time. I finally replied. Huh? I was kidding. It was all a joke. A joke. A lie. He wasn't making any sense. I looked at S and he glanced at me and then smiled. I'm sorry. I didn't think you'd believe me so easily. I just happened to have the perfect rock on hand when I pulled the bucket out of the well, so I got a little carried away. Then I didn't know how to break the joke, so my bad. I'm sorry. No way. He was kidding, right? What part was the joke? The kappa? or the Mizuko? There's a story that Kappa are a metaphor for culled children. But think about it. Why would the villagers make a metaphor for their own sins? No, their shame. Why would they do that on purpose? Well, it's not like anyone would know, and maybe they felt bad, so... I get it. Even if that Kappa story was to make us feel regret, well, maybe the villagers didn't know about the metaphor and the story just happened to get passed along like that. But there were no children in that well. How do you know that? Easy. Because it would mess with their lifestyle. Huh? There aren't many farming villages deep in the mountains that rely on wells. They have access to other sources of water. But the fact that well was so deep meant that it was because it was necessary. No one would be stupid enough to throw their kids down the well. There are plenty of other places you could do that. But the Mizuko statues, that was a lie. It was just a rock. The shape was totally different as well, and the statues at the entrance to the village were just regular Jizo statues. What about the water in the well? It's not uncommon for previously dry wells to fill up again. I looked to the back seat to ask Kay for help. He was asleep. So that was why he was so quiet. What a useless asshole. Don't tell Kay. Let him be quiet a little longer, S said. For a moment, I was dumbfounded. I'd been fooled. Fooled! There was no bigger idiot than me. But, at the same time, I also felt like I'd been saved from the bowels of the earth. Of course, I was angry and wanted to call him nasty names. But honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I was glad it was a joke. S said it was a joke, so it had to be. That was what I decided to believe. That was why I decided not to worry about why that stone lid was so heavy. That was why I decided not to worry about S's expression being gentler than usual. And that was why I decided not to worry about the small tooth I saw in the water when S offered me the bucket. I decided not to ask him about that. Because it was all a joke. For our next story, a mother and son take a trip to the famous Kibune Shrine in Kyoto, but once they get there, they find an old man who tells them about a unique night festival that very few people are aware of. When they decide to check it out, they soon discover why. Find out the truth in Mountain Festival. It had been a while since I had any time off. It was only 2 days, but I had also received my bonus, so I figured I'd take Mum out to eat something nice. And so, we set out for a Japanese inn in Kibune, Kyoto. It was the season for eating alongside the river, and it was a weekday, so we were able to get a room. When I let my mother know, she was overjoyed and said she wanted to walk around Kurama as well. I had no objections. It took about 30 minutes from Demachi Yanagi Station on the Keihan line to Kurama Station on the Eizan Electric Railway. During that time, the scenery changed from a grid-like city to more and more fields, to finally ride in the middle of the mountains. If you have good shoes, even a family can walk from Kurama to Kibune through the mountains in about 2 hours, and for a one-day trip, you can also go the other way, from Kibune to Kurama, to use the hot springs there too. The weather was beautiful and refreshing. Because I didn't want to walk around with my luggage, I left it at the inn and we set out for Mount Kurama. The moment I stepped through the magnificent mountain gate, a strong wind suddenly kicked up and blew dried leaves upon us. It wasn't the season for falling leaves, but when I was with my mother, this always happened. She called it the Tengu's glorious death. It was annoying. There was a ropeway on the way, but my mother preferred walking, so we walked up several steep approaches on our way to the main shrine. As we passed Yuki Shrine, some of the trees about halfway up the large path ahead of us started to oddly bend. This happened every time. After paying our respects at the Kurama Temple Golden Hall, we walked along the tree root path further on. In front of the Mao Hall, a small, elegant, elderly man was chanting the Kurama Tengu song in a nice voice. These powerful words seemed to spread out into the surrounding trees, and I soon found myself stopping to listen. When the last words disappeared into the sky, everyone else who had stopped alongside me sighed and clapped their hands. The old man smiled and then left in the direction of Osugi Gongen. We walked down Mount Kurama and along the Kibune River. Even though it was midday in the middle of summer, the air was cool and refreshing. There were several places along the river for people to stop and eat while enjoying the view. During the weekend, these places would be full, but on this particular day, not so much. A little further away, in the cool and clear stream, brown dippers chased after small fish in the water, and a grey heron waited patiently for its prey. Dragonflies also flitted through the tall pampas grass. Many people visit Kibune Shrine, but few visit the inner shrine. As I enjoyed the serenity, I put my hands together at the small shrine by the boat-shaped stone. I wished I could have brought my younger brothers along with us, but it was a weekday and on short notice. It wouldn't matter much if we were students, but we were all workers, so I couldn't do such selfish things anymore. As I was talking with my mother, I turned around and saw the old man who had been singing in front of the Mao Hall earlier, walking towards us. I nodded my head in greeting, and he smiled and raised a hand. "Thank you for that lovely song earlier." No, not at all." The old man shook his head, then looked at both me and my mother. "Mother and son trip? How nice. You came here on a great day. Today is the mountain festival." "Oh? Is there a festival?" When my mother heard that, she perked up. "It will be held tonight once the lights along the river go out. The festival can only be held when the time is right, and because it's a true night festival, not many people know of it. If you do decide to go, you should wear a yukata. It will be easier to dance that way," the old man said. My mother was already excited. She used to take part in bond dances, after all. Ah well, I didn't like bond dances, but what other choice did I have? I had to join her. Round lights like yellow peaches sparkled alongside the river. There were almost no other people there. As we approached the inner shrine, the sound of a flute floated in on the breeze from somewhere. It seemed the mountain festival wasn't at all like the bond dance I was expecting. We took a sharp left turn at Okukibune Bridge, and as we followed the narrow path into the mountains, the sound of the flute became clearer. I couldn't make out the song, but it was a slow melody that seemed to come from several different flutes. Before long, numerous white lanterns came into view between the trees. Then, in an open space about the size of a gym, dozens of people danced in tune to the flutes. They were dressed in white yukatas with dark navy patterns of waves. The women wore red belts, while the men wore black with gold scales on them. Their movements were graceful, as though they were gliding rather than dancing, and there was none of the usual upbeat tempo I expected from a regular dance. The person next to us, who had arrived earlier and was watching the dance, suddenly rushed in to join and grabbed the dancers' hands. Maybe they knew them. The old man approached us with a quiet smile on his face. Ah, you've come. Good evening. It sure is a strange dance, isn't it? Then the old man said something strange. There must be someone you want to meet in there, yes? Someone I wanted to meet? I stood there, confused for a moment, and then my mother suddenly rushed in. Mum? I saw a familiar face reaching a hand out. A face I'd seen back in our family home since I was a child. A smiling face in the photos on display who looked an awful lot like me. My father, who died when I was 2. The dancers weaved around my mother like she wasn't even there as she made her way towards my father. With each step, time seemed to rewind for my mother. She was married for only 3 years and had been a mother for much, much longer than that. Now, as she held my father's hand, she spoke as if a dam had broken, and he smiled as he listened silently, only occasionally chiming in. Neither of them cried. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but no doubt time melted around them. It was like my parents were back to their early courtship days again. It was the first time I'd seen them like that. Ah, so that was what my father's smile was like, huh? And my mother was really that shy? I felt my heart swell, seeing them so attracted to each other, even after all this time. My father invited her and my mother joined him for a dance. She was rather good and really seemed to be enjoying herself. A shamisen sounded in my head and the voice of a tayu echoed. As I was watching my parents dance, my mother suddenly seemed to remember me, and she pulled my father over by the hand. I wondered how I should greet him. It was my first time seeing him. I was at a loss for words when my father, who so resembled my calm brother's demeanor, grabbed me without word. He was thinner than me, but his hug was strong and warm. I never imagined that he would have such a strong presence. You've grown. His words were full of emotion. My own feelings caught in my chest and refused to turn into words. I managed to push out a single word. Father. Yes, he gave a gentle reply, but that was enough. I couldn't hold it in any more and burst into tears. I couldn't laugh at my mum. Next thing I knew, I was telling my dad all about my friends, my work, and anything I could think of. Up until that point, I didn't think others would understand me if I spoke about myself, so outside of school or important things, I hadn't even spoken to my mother about my life. My father's quiet 1 or 2 word replies made me happy. For the first time, I felt like I understood why children wanted to tell their parents everything that went on during their day. And when I finished talking, my father looked somewhat sad. I'm sorry. I wish I could spend more time with you, but it's time for me to go. Time wouldn't stop just for us, but there was no point crying over it. That would just worry those important to me. Yeah, I understood. I'd see him off with a smile. I'm terribly sorry I couldn't be there for you. It's fine. Leave it to me. I'm still here. I was the eldest son. I gave him a grand thumbs up, and he nodded, his face relieved. My mother looked at him gently, and he gave her a brilliant smile in return. Well then, it's time for me to go. He turned back towards the other dancers. Father! I couldn't stop myself from calling out. He turned around. I'm glad that I'm your son. I truly felt that way. He smiled gently and then disappeared like a puff of smoke. My mother stared at the now empty spot where he had just been for a while, and then finally shook her head in resignation. "Come, let's go home," she said. The next morning, I left my sleeping mother and made my way over to Okukibune Bridge. I turned left, as we had the night before, and entered the narrow path leading into the mountains. But of course, nothing was there. The old man said that the mountain festival was held only when the time was right. What we saw the previous night may have been nothing more than an illusion, but we were able to see the person we wanted to see and tell him everything we wanted to tell him. It was a happy trip. For our final story this week, we're heading back to a terrifying moment in the past, where a young woman and her friend happened to stumble across someone performing a forbidden ritual. A ritual that will end in the curse reverted back on the caster, should they be seen doing it. This one's called Hour of the Ox Ritual. There were rumors that people used this old abandoned temple to nail dolls to trees to curse people. People would do this by weaving hair, nails, and so on of the person they hated into a doll, and then nailing it to a sacred tree so as to curse that person. However, as the saying goes, if you're going to curse someone, dig 2 graves, and if someone happened to see you carrying out the ritual, then the curse would be turned back on you. This was why it was done late at night, out of the sight of others, so that nobody would see you doing it. However, if someone did happen to see you, then you had to make it so that nobody did. Meaning, you had to kill the person who saw you, or the curse would be turned against you. When my mother was young, she had a terrifying experience when it came to this ritual at the Hour of the Ox. On this particular day, she visited a summer festival a few towns over with a friend. When the festival was over, they hung out and played with fireworks and such, and by the time they started riding home, it was past midnight. It all happened when they were quietly riding down a dark forest road. They reached a fork in the road with one side leading to an abandoned temple. "I can hear something," her friend said, and they stopped. They listened closer, and although it was faint, they definitely heard a strange sound in the distance, like banging. My mother was a young woman who didn't know fear, and caught up in all the excitement of the festival that had just ended, she and her friend decided to head up the road towards the abandoned temple to see what the noise was. It was a small test of courage. And as it turned out, that strange sound was coming from the temple grounds. After about 20 minutes, they finally reached the end of the road, and they hid in the shadows of the stone stairs as they peeked into the temple grounds. There, they saw a woman in white hammering something into a large old tree in front of the temple. And each time she landed the hammer, that strange banging sound echoed in the darkness of the mountains. "It's the Hour of the Ox Ritual." My mother and her friend quickly realized what they were seeing, and, without looking back, turned to leave. However, as she stepped on the gravel, my mother's shoes made a sound. The woman by the tree heard it, and she turned to glare at them with a terrifying look on her face. My mother turned to look at her, and their eyes met. "You saw, didn't you?" the woman growled in a low voice. She turned and started walking straight for my mother. My mother screamed, grabbed her friend's sleeve, and then started running down the stairs at full speed. She had no idea if the woman was chasing them. They just ran as fast as they possibly could. When they finally reached the end of the stairs and got back to the original fork in the road, they kept running all the way back towards the village. "Are these bikes yours?" a male voice asked from behind. They turned around, and a police officer from the village was standing there. He was on patrol and just happened to find the bikes on the forest road by the fork. My mother and her friend grabbed the officer and started screaming about monsters. He laughed and accompanied them back to the village. It was incredibly late, so my mother's parents were more than a little upset with her, but she didn't even care. She jumped straight into bed and she was so frightened that she had nightmares for the next 3 days straight. About 5 years ago, that old tree was finally cut down. There was a fear that its dying branches could fall and cause a hazard. When they examined the trunk of the tree, they found over 100 needles that they believed had been used in the Hour of the Ox ritual. A huge thank you and shout out to this week's Kami tier member, Christina. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show, so thank you very much. Don't forget to pick up Kowabana Volume 10, available on Amazon right now, and check out our newly revamped merchandise store at kowabana.store. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kowabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kowabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.